So welcome to week 3 here at Georgetown University, Applied Intelligence here at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. The only announcement, paper one is due right now, tomorrow, today, yesterday, depending when you're watching this, and I'll grade this week so you get my feedback for future papers. So due now, didn't get any requests for extension, so I look forward to marking them this upcoming week. So review of last week, and again, in a 7.5-week course, we don't have time to take weeks for papers or anything along those lines. So requirements. Integrated into the collection plan as you've done, and then we covered this past week, intelligence traps. So key issues, again, confirmation bias. This is where you have a set on theory of a case, and all future evidence is formed to fit that theory. We often get this when we're doing first impressions or anything like that, where, again, we come to a conclusion and we can fashion ambivalent information to confirm that. Mirror imaging. Again, we assume an adversary is going to think like us and use the same thought process to come to a conclusion. And I had several examples of mirror imaging or false mirror imaging that you saw in the reading and in my lecture. And I think we're doing a little bit of it now when we're trying to determine Russia's intentions, whether it's future war on Ukraine, potential escalation of nuclear weapons. I think we're a little bit guilty of mirror imaging. And then the case study was the confessions. And you saw many of these issues illustrated in the documentary that you saw. Just a couple of things. This is classic confirmation bias. They set on a theory of the case that it was these Navy sailors, or specifically Joe Dick, one of the neighbors, and they set on that he was the killer. And when they found that contrarian evidence, they dismissed that to focus that it must have been a gang rape by these Navy sailors, that a gang rape that led to murder. Vividness bias. Detective Ford knew that a confession played in front of a jury a lot better than any other evidence. Confession played more than DNA, which was relatively new at the time, trace evidence, motive, timelines. Those are the other aspects of a murder case. But if you don't have that, the confession plays well in front of a jury, and you all saw that in the case study, where the way they sounded, the way they said, "I entered the door, I pinned her to the ground, I raped her, then I slit her throat," and the detail that they're saying in those recordings really is going to sell to a jury, even though, again, those confessions were as phony as a $3 bill. But that was the vividness bias that you saw exhibited there. Negative evidence. The question was to focus on these 4 people and now look for motive for them that they are killers. The question that was not asked was, why are we not seeing trace evidence or DNA evidence or motive or timelines matching up? That's part of a negative evidence. No one asked those secondary questions. Everyone said, he's the killer, here's the evidence that says they're the killers. No one asked the alternative. Why are we not seeing X, Y, and Z that are part of almost every murder out there? And again, everyone was focused on the positive evidence, the confession that connected these people to the crime, and not on those negative evidence that were much more applicable. And finally, clientelism. The client in this case was the people of Norfolk, and Detective Ford and the prosecutors and everyone did not want a criminal, a murderer out there. So there was pressure to solve the crime. And that led to these false confessions, or this false convictions that you saw here, this gross injustice. So again, you see many of these issues coming up in this case study going forward. A couple of things I just want to talk about is Georgetown values. I don't know if anyone here is Catholic or Jesuit or really cares, and I doubt religion or those issues was probably a decision on you coming to the school. But we do try and instill a sense of ethics and a sense of justice in this program, knowing that people who graduate will be in these positions to decide whether this person's guilty and this person deserves a life sentence, and not make that decision based on cursory evidence. And I'm hoping you understand that, or you get that lesson from this, especially if you go into criminal justice or law enforcement. And I will just say that this case was not decided until 2019. The documentary ended in 2009, but the final settlements, what wasn't shown in this documentary, in 2014, they were let out of prison in 2009, as you saw in the documentary. In 2017, the last day McAuliffe was governor, he vacated their sentences. And then in 2019, the final lawsuits were rectified with the city of Norfolk. And this didn't, it took 20 plus years for this to be solved. And that was a gross injustice because people at the front end, Detective Ford and others, made bad decisions. The other thing I'll just say is, you could all say this is a rogue cop, that it was just Detective Ford, as you saw, who was later convicted of criminal activity on his own. But before you say that, I would just say that detectives, other police officers, juries, prosecutors, judges, appellate courts, all the way up to the governor, all let this case, we're all culpable in this case. It wasn't just one rogue cop that resulted in this. And then I want to leave you with this question, the last thing about this case study. I'll leave you this question that a student brought up a couple of years ago, and I've pondered this quite considerably. We're talking about analytical bias here. And we're going to talk about analytical bias in future case studies, whether the Iraq War or Yom Kippur War or others. And the people that suffered from these analytical biases, they were all good people. They weren't bad people. They just had biases, like we all do. And these biases forced people to come to bad conclusions. That did not happen here, according to a former student. This was an evil person with evil intent. This wasn't a biased person, but an evil person who caused this gross injustice. And Detective Ford is the evil person. And that is the root of this. That this shouldn't be a case study in bias. This should be just a case study in the banality of evil, for lack of a better term. I don't know. I've thought about that. I don't necessarily agree with it. Reason being is several reasons. One, it wasn't just Detective Ford. It was a whole system that failed beyond this. So you can't just pin it all on Detective Ford. And number two, I think under the right circumstances, we could all be Detective Fords. And maybe that goes to my negative view of human nature, but I think under the right circumstances, good people can do horrible things. You can't just say all the Nazis were psychotic or all the Nazis are just evil, because thousands of people engaged in the apparatus of mass killings. You can't just say that thousands of people were bad in the Rwandan genocide back 20 years ago, because thousands of people participated in it. So they were not mentally ill or psychotic or evil, but good people under the right circumstances commit some horrible crimes. And I think that's what happened here. And I think we're all capable of it. But I'll let you decide on that. So going to week 3 preview, 2 case studies, a strategic surprise, Pearl Harbor, and Yom Kippur War. And as you're going through this, ask, what were the failures? What were the failures in collection? What were the failures in analysis? What were the failures in the policy interference? And finally, were the failures where policymakers failed to act even though they were briefed on the intelligence? And then finally, I say underlying circumstances, probably the most better way is stuff happens, right? You can make the argument there was just really bad luck in these cases here. The commanders get blamed, but there was just circumstances beyond their control that led this. So as you're reading through this, as you're going through the documentaries, ask where did the failure occur? So again, you have the Dal intelligence and surprise attack. 3 chapters on that. The Yom Kippur War, the Bruce Rydell, I think that's what's highlighted here. If not, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the announcements to make sure you have it. And then Al Jazeera, The Crossing, which is a first part. I've assigned only the first part of the documentary. Really, the first 30 minutes are the most important part. You're welcome to watch all 3 parts of the documentary as well. It's well done, but the first documentary is the only one I signed, and the first 30 minutes are probably the most important, which covers the intelligence failure. So that covers week 3. If there's questions or issues, let me know.